They were all watching each other, filming, posting, competing. 10 influencers locked in one house, millions of followers at stake. Then, the producer who controlled everything was found dead in the pool. Every second was recorded, but the moment of the murder doesn't exist.
Chapter 1: The House. The house was louder than it should have been for a place designed to manufacture attention, not noise, and Edward Hale noticed that before he noticed anything else, which was unusual because in most environments, sound followed visibility, not the other way around. But here the hierarchy was inverted. The building stood on the edge of the city like a statement that didn't need to be explained. Glass, concrete, and carefully curated angles that looked better on camera than they did in reality. Every surface optimized for framing, every room designed with the assumption that someone, somewhere, would be watching it through a screen rather than standing inside it. Hale paused at the gate long enough to observe the pattern, not the architecture itself, but the rhythm of movement, people entering, exiting, pausing, adjusting posture before stepping into view, as if crossing an invisible line where performance replaced behavior. The call had come less than an hour ago, short, efficient, almost impatient, the kind of call that skipped context because context was considered a liability. "Producer's dead," the voice had said. "Cause?" Hale asked. "Unknown. Location? Pool." A pause. "And there's a complication," the voice added. "There always is. They were filming." Hale hadn't asked who they were because it didn't matter yet. They always meant the same thing, variables. Now, standing in front of the house, he understood the scale of it, because this wasn't a private residence. It was a system, a closed loop of content production where people lived, performed, competed, and documented each other in real time. And somewhere inside that loop, someone had died without the system capturing the moment that mattered. The gate opened without him touching it, which meant he had already been identified, which meant someone inside had been watching his approach, which meant the system was not as blind as it pretended to be. He stepped through, noting the cameras immediately, not hidden, not discreet, but overt, positioned at angles that prioritized aesthetic over coverage, wide shots, flattering perspectives, blind spots disguised as design choices, because the goal here was not surveillance, but narrative. The path to the house cut across a manicured courtyard that looked untouched but wasn't, the grass too even, the surfaces too clean, the kind of maintenance that erased evidence before it could become inconvenient. He reached the entrance, the door already open, and the first thing that hit him was the shift in sound. Outside, noise was diffuse, uncontrolled. Inside, it was layered, directional, engineered. Voices overlapping with music, with footsteps, with the faint, constant hum of devices recording, buffering, transmitting. A woman approached him before he had taken 3 steps inside, phone in hand, camera already facing outward, her expression switching from neutral to engaged in less than a second. "You must be," she began. "Yes," Hale said, stepping slightly to the side, just enough to move out of her frame without breaking her rhythm. "And you must be recording." She blinked, recalibrating. "It's just for context." "To whom?" Hale asked. "To the audience." "There is no audience yet, only data." A brief pause, her smile tightening at the edges, not disappearing, just adjusting to a version of the interaction that didn't fit her script. "Its management is waiting," she said, lowering the phone slightly, not turning it off. "Of course they are," Hale answered. He moved past her without further engagement, letting the house unfold in front of him as a sequence rather than a space, each room connected not by architecture but by lines of sight, by how one angle transitioned into another, how movement in one area became background in another, and it became clear almost immediately that this place did not prioritize coverage, it prioritized content. Cameras were everywhere, but they were not positioned to capture everything. They were positioned to capture what looked best, and that distinction mattered more than most people realized.
The main hall opened into a wide, open-plan space where several of the residents were gathered, not in a group, but in clusters, each cluster orbiting its own center of attention, phones raised, screens glowing, conversations fragmented into segments that could be clipped, edited, repurposed. Hale did not stop, did not engage, because initial impressions in environments like this were always contaminated by performance, and performance was the least reliable form of information. He scanned instead for what did not align, for the small inconsistencies that persisted even when people tried to control how they were seen, and he found them quickly. Postures held a fraction too long, glances exchanged off camera, the subtle coordination between individuals who were supposed to be in conflict, and beneath it all, a tension that had not yet been translated into content. A man stepped forward from the far side of the room, older than the others, dressed in a way that suggested control rather than style, his expression composed but not relaxed, the kind of composure that came from managing outcomes rather than participating in them. "Mr. Hale," he said, extending a hand. Hale looked at it, then at him, then took it briefly, not committing to the gesture beyond what was necessary. "You're in charge," Hale said. "I'm responsible," the man replied. "That's not the same thing." "It is here," the man said. Hale allowed that for now. "Walk me through it," he said. "This way," the man replied, turning without waiting for agreement. They moved through the house, the noise receding slightly as they transitioned from public to private space, though never fully disappearing, because even the quieter areas were designed to be filmed, just with different intent. The corridor leading to the back of the house was lined with glass panels that reflected movement in fractured segments, turning a single person into multiple versions of themselves depending on the angle. And Hale registered that without comment, because environments that multiplied perspective tended to distort it as well. "He gathered them yesterday," the man said as we walked. "All of them. Different backgrounds, different audiences, but high engagement across the board." "And conflict," Hale added. The man glanced at him. "Yes, of course," Hale said. "Conflict scales." The man didn't respond. "He announced it this morning," he continued. "A restructuring, ownership transfer." "Ownership of what?" Hale asked. "The accounts, all of them, his network, millions of followers." "And he was going to give that to one of them?" Hale said. "Yes." "Based on what?" "Performance." Hale allowed himself the smallest fraction of a smile. "Of course," he said. They reached the back of the house, where the architecture opened again, this time not into a room, but into an exterior space that had been integrated into the interior logic, the boundary between inside and outside blurred to maintain continuity of filming. The pool sat at the center, perfectly rectangular, water still, reflective, the kind of stillness that suggested recent disturbance rather than natural calm. The area had been cleared, not completely, but enough to create a perimeter, and within that perimeter, the absence was more noticeable than the presence because the body had already been removed. "Where was he?" Hale asked. The man gestured. "There," he said. Hale stepped forward, stopping at the edge of the pool, looking down into the water, not for what was there, but for what had been displaced, the subtle irregularities in reflection, the way light broke differently across the surface where movement had occurred. He crouched slightly, bringing his perspective closer, aligning his line of sight with the plane of the water. "Time of death?" he asked. "Approximately 30 minutes before he was found." "And who found him?" "One of the residents." "Which one?" The man hesitated. "They all say they were nearby," he said. Hale nodded slowly. "Of course they do," he said. He stood again, turning away from the pool to face the surrounding space, mapping positions, angles, potential lines of sight, and immediately the problem clarified itself, not as an absence of data, but as an overabundance of it. Every angle had been covered, but not consistently, not continuously, each camera capturing its own version of events without synchronizing with the others, creating a network of partial truths that did not align into a single coherent timeline. "They were filming," Hale said. "Yes." "All of them?" "Yes." "And you have the footage?" "We do." Hale looked at him. "All of it?" he asked. The man hesitated again, longer this time. "All that was saved," he said. Hale exhaled slowly. "Good," he said. "That's good?" the man asked. "It means the problem isn't absence," Hale replied. A pause. "It's structure." He stepped back from the pool, turning toward the house again, toward the system that had produced this outcome without capturing it. "Bring them all together," he said. "They're already—" "No," Hale cut in. "Not physically, structurally." The man frowned. "I don't understand." "You will," Hale said. "Soon enough." He started walking back toward the interior, the direction fixed now, the investigation no longer about discovering what happened, but about aligning what was already there into something that could not contradict itself. "Because right now," he added, without turning back, "you don't have a lack of evidence." A pause. "You have too much of it." Chapter 2. The Footage. The first problem with evidence was never its absence. It was its volume, and in a place where recording was not an option but a reflex, volume became noise long before it became clarity. Edward Hale stood in front of a wall that had not been designed as a wall, but as a surface for projection, playback, and control. And now it was filled with fragments of the same event that did not align into a single timeline, screens arranged in rows, each displaying a different angle, a different moment, a different interpretation of what had happened around the pool. The room itself was quieter than the rest of the house, not silent, but contained, the kind of containment that suggested importance rather than privacy. And behind Hale, the man from management hovered at a distance that implied access without interference, as if unsure whether to observe or to assist. "This is everything?" Hale asked, not turning. "All the footage we could retrieve," the man replied. "That's not what I asked." A pause. "It's what we have." The man nodded once, accepting the answer for what it was, not confirmation, but limitation. "Play it," he said.
The screens shifted, not in unison, but in sequence, each feed beginning at a slightly different point, already out of sync before the content even mattered, and Hale did not try to correct that immediately, because the misalignment itself was data. He watched without focusing on any single frame, letting his attention move across the surfaces, picking up motion rather than detail, rhythm rather than content. And almost immediately, the pattern revealed its first inconsistency, not in what was shown, but in how it was shown. "Pause," he said. The room froze, screens locking into place, each frame capturing a different second that pretended to be the same. "What time is this?" Hale asked. The man checked a console. 21:18, he said. "On which feed?" Hale asked. The man hesitated. "On most of them." Hale turned slightly. "Define most." "Some are delayed," the man admitted. "Upload latency, buffering." "No," Hale said. "Not upload. Capture." Silence. "These are not simultaneous," Hale continued. "They only look like they are." He stepped closer to the screens, narrowing his focus now, selecting individual frames, comparing them not by content, but by contradiction. "Here," he said, pointing to one screen where two bloggers stood near the pool, mid-conversation. "And here," he shifted his hand to another screen, same location, same people, almost. "Same moment," he said, "different positions." "That's just angle," the man replied quickly. "No," Hale said. "Angle changes perspective, not sequence." He tapped the first screen lightly. "His hand is raised," he said. Then the second. "Here, it isn't." A pause. "That's not angle," Hale added. That's time." The man frowned, stepping closer now despite himself. "They weren't filming continuously," he said. "Some clips start later, some earlier." "Yes," Hale said, "exactly." He straightened, stepping back just enough to take in the entire wall again. "This is not a single event recorded from multiple angles," Hale said. "This is multiple events that overlap." Silence. "That doesn't make sense," the man said. "It does," Hale replied. "You're just trying to force it into a structure it doesn't have." He moved along the wall, eyes scanning, selecting, discarding, aligning fragments in his head rather than on the screen, because the screen was lying, not intentionally, but structurally. "Who was live?" Hale asked. "Two of them, short streams. And the rest? Recording, drafts, some posted later. Timestamps? Inconsistent." "Of course they are," Hale said. He stopped at a screen that showed the pool from a slightly elevated angle, the water still, the surface unbroken, and yet on another screen, same pool, same lighting, there was movement, a ripple that should have been visible across all feeds if they were aligned. "Pause that," Hale said. The frame froze. "And this," he added, pointing to another screen. Both images held, side by side. "Same time?" Hale asked. "Yes," the man said. "No," Hale replied. He stepped closer to the screens, narrowing the gap between himself and the screens. "Look at the water," he said. The man did. "It's different," Hale continued. "One is disturbed, the other is not." "Then one is earlier," the man said. "Or later," Hale corrected. "Then the timestamp is wrong." "They all are," Hale said. A pause. "Not because they're inaccurate, because they're independent." He turned away from the screens, walking slowly across the room, letting the implications settle into place before stating them. "No shared clock," Hale said. "No synchronization." "That's normal," the man said. "Phones don't—" "Phones do," Hale interrupted, "but people don't use them that way." Silence. "They start recording at different moments," Hale continued. "They stop at different moments. They edit. They delay." He turned back. "They create sequences," he said, "not timelines." The man's expression shifted slightly, the resistance giving way to recognition of a problem he had not defined yet. "So what does that mean?" he asked. Hale looked at the screens again, then back at him. "It means," he said, "that this is not evidence." A pause. "It's interpretation." Silence stretched, heavier now, less comfortable. "Then how do we use it?" the man asked. Hale allowed himself a brief pause, not for effect, but because the answer needed to be precise. "We don't," he said. The man blinked. "What?" "We don't use it as a record," Hale repeated. "We use it as behavior." A longer pause. "I don't understand." "You will," Hale said. He stepped back toward the wall, this time not looking at the content, but at the structure of the feeds themselves, the way they began, ended, overlapped. "Find me the moment," he said, "where the maximum number of people are filming." The man hesitated, then turned to the console, fingers moving across controls, screens shifting, aligning not by time, but by density. "Here," he said after a moment, "this is the peak." The screens filled with activity, multiple angles of the same general area, people talking, moving, gesturing, phones visible in almost every frame. "Good," Hale said. He stepped closer. "Now," he continued, "find me the moment where the least is visible." "That doesn't make sense," the man said. "If everyone's filming, then nothing aligns," Hale finished. A pause. "That's the point." The man searched again, slower this time, less certain. "Here," he said eventually, "there's less movement." Hale looked. Not empty, not silent, but reduced. Conversations breaking, people shifting position, attention fragmenting. "Zoom," Hale said. The image expanded. "And here," Hale added, pointing to a figure near the edge of the frame, partially obscured, moving in the background. "That's just—" "No," Hale said. "Watch." The clip played. The figure moved, not quickly, not stealthily, just uninterrupted. "Again," Hale said. It played. "No one looks at them," Hale said. "They're in the background." "They're in every background," Hale corrected. A pause. "Switch feeds." The image changed. Same figure, different angle, different second. Again, another. Always present, never central. "They were visible," the man said slowly. "Yes," Hale replied. "And no one registered them," Hale finished. Silence. He stepped back, letting the structure finalize. "They didn't hide," he said. A pause. "They dispersed." The man frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Hale said, "that the event doesn't exist in a single moment." He gestured toward the screens. "It's distributed." A longer pause. "Across all of this." Silence settled, dense now, unavoidable. "Then where is the moment?" the man asked. Hale looked at him. "There isn't one," he said. A beat. "That's why no one saw it." The room held still, the weight of the realization shifting the entire structure of the investigation, from searching for a missing piece to understanding that the piece had never been singular. Hale turned back to the screens one last time, eyes moving across the fragments, not as evidence, but as a system that had functioned exactly as designed. "Now," he said quietly, "we stop looking for when it happened." A pause. "And start asking how it was allowed to happen everywhere."
Chapter 3. The Pool. The pool was quieter now, not because the house had calmed down, but because attention had shifted elsewhere, redistributed across screens, conversations, controlled narratives that were already beginning to replace the event itself. And Edward Hale preferred it that way, because empty spaces retained more truth than crowded ones. The water had returned to its artificial stillness, surface smooth, reflective, as if nothing had disturbed it at all, which was precisely why it mattered, because disturbances did not disappear, they redistributed, they translated into other forms, movement, timing, absence, and Hale stood at the edge long enough to let the scene reconstruct itself without interference, aligning what he had seen on the screens with what the space itself suggested. Behind him, the man from management remained silent, which was an improvement, because silence, unlike explanation, did not introduce variables. "You removed the body," Hale said. "Yes." "When?" "About an hour ago." "Who authorized it?" The man hesitated. "It was necessary." "That's not authorization," Hale replied. A pause. "Standard protocol." Hale nodded once, not because he agreed, but because the answer had confirmed what he already suspected. Control of the narrative had been prioritized over preservation of the scene. "Good," he said. The man frowned. "That's good?" "It means," Hale replied, "that what mattered is still here." He stepped closer to the edge, lowering his gaze to the water, not looking for reflections now, but for inconsistencies in the surface tension, the way light fractured differently where something had disrupted the equilibrium. "Show me exactly where he was found," Hale said. The man moved forward, pointing to a section near the center. "There." Hale crouched slightly, adjusting his angle. "Floating?" he asked. "Face down. No impact marks on the edge?" "No." "No signs of slipping?" "No." Hale let that settle, then shifted his attention to the surrounding area, to the tiles, the subtle variations in texture that most people would never register. "And no one saw him fall," Hale said. "They were all here," the man replied, "filming, talking. And yet," Hale said, "no one captured the moment." A pause. "That's what you said." "That's what the footage says," Hale corrected.
He stood again, stepping back just enough to take in the entire space, mapping positions not as they are now, but as they had been during the window between 9 and 10, aligning bodies, cameras, lines of sight. "Where were they standing?" Hale asked. The man gestured vaguely. "Everywhere, around the pool. Show me." The man hesitated, then began indicating positions more precisely, placing individuals in relation to each other, reconstructing a scene that had already proven unreliable. "Here," he said, "and here, and here." Hale watched, not the placements themselves, but the gaps between them, the spaces that no one claimed, the negative zones that existed between overlapping fields of view. "Too clean," Hale said. "What?" "This layout, too symmetrical, too convenient. It's a pool, people stand around it. Not like this," Hale said.
He stepped into the space, moving through the positions the man had indicated, testing them against his own internal model, adjusting angles, aligning sight lines. "Stand there," Hale said, pointing. The man complied. "And look at me." The man did. "Now," Hale continued, stepping slightly to the side, "can you see the edge of the pool behind me?" "Partially. And if someone moved between us, I would notice." "Would you?" Hale asked. A pause. "Yes." "Under normal conditions," Hale said. Silence. He shifted again, adjusting the angle. "And now," the man hesitated. "Less," he admitted. "Less is enough," Hale said. He stepped back, breaking the alignment. "The problem isn't visibility," he continued. "It's attention." A pause. "And attention," he added, "was already compromised." The man exhaled slowly. "So he falls," he said. "No one notices. That's your theory." Hale shook his head slightly. "No," he said, "he doesn't fall." A pause. "He's already in the water." Silence. "That's not possible," the man said. "It is," Hale replied, "if the entry is controlled." "How do you control someone entering a pool without triggering attention?" Hale finished. "You don't." A pause. "You reduce the threshold for noticing." The man stared at him. "You're saying someone pushed him." "I'm saying," Hale replied, "that if they did, it didn't register as significant." Silence settled again, heavier now. Hale moved to the edge, crouching lower this time, bringing his line of sight almost level with the water, and from this angle something shifted, not visually, not dramatically, but structurally, the alignment of reflections revealing a slight irregularity near the surface, a distortion that did not match the rest of the pool. "Stop," he said. The man froze. "Don't move." Hale leaned slightly closer, eyes narrowing, isolating the distortion from the surrounding reflections. "There," he said. "What is it?" the man asked. Hale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket, not for a tool, but for a small object, a coin, something simple, something controlled. "Watch," he said. He dropped it into the water. The surface broke, ripples expanding outward in concentric circles, predictable, uniform. "Now compare," Hale said. The man looked, then back at the earlier distortion. "It's different," he said. "Yes," Hale replied. "How?" "Angle, direction." A pause. "This isn't a fall," Hale added. "It's an entry." Silence. "Someone placed him," the man said slowly. "Or guided him," Hale corrected. A longer pause. "And no one noticed." "No one registered it," Hale replied. He stood again, stepping back, letting the full structure settle into place. "They were all filming," he said, "all focused on each other, on performance." A pause. "Not on the pool." The man looked around, as if seeing the space for the first time without the assumption that it had been fully observed. "So the moment," he began, "doesn't exist," Hale said, "not as a single event." He turned slightly, scanning the surrounding area again, aligning the physical space with the fragmented footage. "It's distributed," he continued, "across movement, across frames, across attention." Silence. "Then how do we isolate it?" the man asked. Hale looked at him. "We don't isolate the moment," he said. A pause. "We isolate the control." The man frowned. "What control?" Hale's gaze moved across the pool, then beyond it,
toward the house, toward the system that had shaped everything without appearing to do so. "The one thing that doesn't change," he said, a beat. "The one thing that doesn't depend on perspective." Silence held. "And what is that?" Hale asked. Hale turned back toward him. "The person," he said quietly, "who doesn't need the camera to exist." The implication settled slowly, but when it did, it shifted the entire structure of the case from fragmented observation to targeted focus, and Hale knew the next step would not involve screens or water or reconstructed positions, but something far simpler, far more reliable. "Now," he said, his tone returning to neutral, procedural clarity, "we find who was present in every version," a pause, "and absent from all of them at the same time."
Chapter 4. The House Pattern. The house did not reveal itself all at once. It resisted that, because places built for performance were designed to fragment perception into manageable pieces, each room its own narrative, each angle its own truth. And Edward Hale understood that the only way to see the structure was to stop looking at the parts individually and start treating the entire building as a single system. He stood at the threshold between a main hall and the corridor, not moving, not engaging, letting the flow of people reestablish itself around him, because interruption created distortions and he needed baseline behavior, not reaction. The bloggers had returned to movement, not naturally but necessarily, because stillness in a place like this was more suspicious than motion. Phones were back in their hands, voices back in their practiced ranges, but something had shifted. Timing, hesitation, the micro-pauses between action and recording that hadn't been there before. Hale watched without focusing, letting his attention widen until individual details dissolved into patterns, and in that pattern, something began to stabilize. "Stop trying to see it," he said quietly, more to himself than to the man behind him. "See what?" the man asked. "The mistake," Hale replied. He stepped forward, not toward any specific person, but into the flow, allowing himself to become part of the environment rather than an observer outside it, because systems behaved differently when they absorbed new variables instead of resisting them. A group near the center shifted to accommodate him, not consciously, but instinctively, adjusting their positions without breaking their conversation, and Hale noted how their phones moved with them, not randomly, but in arcs that maintained framing, each person unconsciously protecting their own angle, their own version of the scene. "Everyone is filming," the man said quietly. "Yes," Hale replied. "And yet the event doesn't exist in any of it," Hale finished. He slowed, turning slightly, aligning his movement with theirs, letting the system continue as if he were not there, because interruption would force adaptation, and adaptation would hide the pattern he was trying to isolate. "Think about it," Hale said, "not as people, as nodes." The man frowned. Each person is a camera," Hale continued. "Each camera has a field of view. Those fields overlap, but not completely." A pause. "And between them," he added, "there are gaps." The man looked around, trying to map what Hale was describing onto what he could see. "But we already established that. Blind spots." "No," Hale said, "not blind spots. A beat. Transitions." The man hesitated. "What's the difference?" Hale stopped, turning just enough to face him. "A blind spot is fixed," he said. "A transition moves." Silence. "It shifts with attention, with movement, with focus." He turned back, stepping aside as one of the bloggers moved past him, phone raised, speaking into it with practiced urgency that had nothing to do with the situation and everything to do with maintaining relevance. "Look at them," Hale said. The man did. "They're not observing, they're performing observation." A pause. "They're not trying to see everything, they're trying to be seen." The implication settled.
And that creates, the man began. Predictable gaps, Hale finished. He resumed walking, slower now, tracing an invisible path through the space, not random, not linear, but responsive, adjusting to movement, to where attention clustered and where it thinned. Now layer that with time, Hale said. The man followed, still trying to align the abstraction with something concrete. Different start points, Hale continued, different durations, different edits. Which means no single timeline, the man said. Yes, Hale replied, but more importantly, he stopped again, this time near a corner where two sight lines intersected but did not fully overlap. No single reality, he said. Silence. The man looked around again, slower this time, more deliberate. So the killer moves through these transitions, he said. Not just moves, Hale corrected. A pause. They align with them. The man frowned. That sounds like control, Hale said. A longer silence followed, the words settling into place. But how do you control something like this? The man asked. There are too many variables. Hale allowed himself the smallest fraction of a nod. Yes, he said, there are. A beat. Unless you remove some. The man's expression shifted. The air, he said. Yes, Hale replied. A pause. Reduced attention, slower reaction, narrower focus. And synchronized, Hale added. Silence. The man exhaled slowly. So everyone's perception drops at the same time, he said. Yes. And that creates predictable transitions. Yes. And someone uses that to move through the gaps. Yes. The structure tightened. The man looked at Hale. Then it's someone who understands the system, he said. Hale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly, his gaze moving across the room again, but this time not searching for patterns, but for consistency, for the one element that did not shift with the rest. Not just understands it, he said finally. A pause. Operates within it. Silence. Staff, the man said. Or equivalent, Hale replied. A beat. Someone who doesn't need to perform, he added. The man's gaze followed Hale's, scanning the room with a different kind of attention now, less reactive, more selective. Who wasn't filming? He asked. Hale didn't respond directly. Instead, he stepped back slightly, widening his perspective again, letting the system present itself one more time. And there it was, not obvious, not highlighted, but consistent, a presence that did not align with the others, not because it stood out, but because it didn't adapt. There, Hale said quietly. The man followed his line of sight. At the edge of the room, partially integrated into the background, stood a woman, phone in hand like the others, posture relaxed, expression neutral, but something about her remained unchanged regardless of what was happening around her, her position constant as others shifted, her framing stable as angles moved, and more importantly, her attention did not follow the same arcs as the rest. She's been in the same position, the man said. Yes, Hale replied. For how long? Long enough, Hale said. A pause. And she's filming, ended Hale. Yes, but she's not performing. Silence.
The realization settled slowly, not as a sudden revelation, but as a correction, a reclassification of something that had been present the entire time but misinterpreted. She's in every sequence, the man said. Yes, and yet she's never central, Hale finished. A longer pause. That's not an accident, the man said. No, Hale replied. A beat. It's design. The structure locked further into place, not complete, not resolved, but aligned enough to move forward without uncertainty. Hale stepped away from the observation point, shifting from analysis to action, the transition smooth, unannounced, because once the pattern stabilized, delay only introduced noise. Bring her, he said. The man hesitated. Here? Yes. And if she won't, Hale said. A pause. How do you know? Hale glanced back once more, confirming the pattern, the consistency, the absence of adaptation. Because, he said quietly, because she already knows this part is over. The man didn't argue. He moved, cutting through the room with a different kind of purpose now, less uncertain, more directed, while Hale remained where he was, not approaching, not forcing interaction, because pressure would only disrupt what had already been established. The system had revealed its stable point, and stable points did not require force, they required confirmation. The noise of the house continued around him, unchanged, indifferent, but beneath it, the structure had shifted. The invisible framework that dictated movement, attention, and absence now exposed enough to act upon, and Hale allowed himself a brief exhale. Not relief, not satisfaction, just acknowledgement that the problem had moved from abstract to solvable. Now, he said under his breath, more statement than intention. We stop mapping the system, a pause, and let the system explain itself. Epilogue, the will. The house did not quiet down after the truth settled into place. It simply adjusted, recalibrated, redistributed attention the same way it always had, because systems built on visibility did not collapse when exposed. They adapted. And Hale stood once more at the edge of the pool, the same surface now indistinguishable from any other, smooth, reflective, already rewritten into something that could be used again. The woman stood opposite him, not restrained, not defensive, not even particularly tense, which was consistent with everything else about her. She did not react, she aligned, and that had been the first real anomaly in a house full of performance. "You've reconstructed it," she said. Hale did not answer immediately. He watched the water instead, not because it held answers, but because it held none, and that absence mattered. "I didn't reconstruct anything. You distributed it." A brief pause. "That's a strange way to describe it." "It's an accurate one," Hale replied. She didn't argue, which was also consistent. "They were all filming. You saw that." "Yes, and none of them saw anything." "No," Hale corrected. "They saw everything."
A pause. They just didn't know what they were looking at. The air between them held, not tense, not calm, just resolved. "He wanted this," she said after a moment. Hale glanced at her. "The conflict," she continued, "the competition. He built the house for it." "Yes," Hale said. "He built a system." "And he made it clear," she added, "only one of us will get everything." "The accounts," Hale said. "The audience," she corrected. A pause. "Same thing," Hale replied. She allowed that. "He underestimated the system," she said. "No," Hale said. "He trusted it." A longer silence followed. "He thought visibility was control," Hale continued, "that if everything was recorded, nothing could happen without being seen. And you're saying he was wrong." "I'm saying," Hale replied, "that visibility without structure is noise." She looked at him, measuring, not defensively, but analytically. "And I use that." "Yes." A pause. "How?" she asked, not because she didn't know, but because articulation mattered. Hale shifted his gaze briefly toward the house, toward the moving figures, the cameras, the constant fragmentation of attention. "You didn't hide," he said. "You aligned." A beat. "With the gaps." She didn't respond. "Everyone was filming," Hale continued, "but not at the same time, not in the same way, no shared timeline." "And the air," she said. "Yes," Hale replied. "Reduced attention, narrowed focus, synchronized perception." A pause. "You moved when their attention dropped below threshold," he added. She inclined her head slightly. "And when they were recording, you were in frame." A beat. "But never central." Silence. "You distributed the act," he said, "across frames, across seconds, across perspectives." "And that means," she said quietly, "there is no single moment." "Yes." A pause. "No single event to point to." Yes, the structure held. And the pool? She asked. Hale looked down at the water again. You didn't push him, he said. A beat. You guided him. Silence. He was already disoriented, already operating below normal awareness. A pause. You adjusted his position, his balance, his orientation. Another pause. And by the time anyone could have registered it, he was already in the water, she finished. Yes. They stood in silence for a moment longer, not as adversaries, not as allies, but as 2 points within the same structure that had now been fully defined. He called it a will, she said. Hale didn't respond. A test, performance, engagement, metrics. A pause. But the system doesn't reward performance, she said. It rewards control. Hale glanced at her. And you controlled it. Yes. A longer silence. Behind them, the house continued, voices rising and falling, cameras shifting, content already being shaped into narratives that would erase the structure in favor of something simpler, more consumable. They'll post it, she said. Fragments, reactions, speculation. Yes, and none of it will show what actually happened. No, it will show what can be understood. A pause. And what happens now? She asked. Hale considered the question not as a legal outcome, but as a structural one, because consequences in systems like this were rarely about truth. They were about what could be proven within the same framework that allowed the event to occur. Now, he said, the system resets. She watched him. And you? She asked. Hale stepped back from the edge of the pool, not turning away yet, just creating distance. I leave, he said. A pause. And this? Hale glanced once more at the house, at the cameras, at the endless production of partial realities. This continues, he said. She nodded slightly, as if that was always the expected outcome. They'll never know, she said. Hale looked at her one last time. They'll think they do, he replied. A beat. That's enough.
He turned then, walking back through the house without interruption, the noise closing around him again, not as distraction, but as confirmation, because nothing had changed, not in any way that would be visible to the people inside it. The door opened as he approached, the outside air cutting through the layered sound, replacing it with something less controlled, less curated, but also less deceptive, and he stepped out without slowing, merging back into the city as if the system behind him had never existed. Inside, the footage would be edited, aligned, compressed into something that made sense, something that could be watched without questioning the structure that produced it, and the event would become content, and the content would become narrative, and the narrative would replace the reality that had never been singular to begin with. Hale did not need to follow it further, because the case had already resolved in the only way that mattered to him, not in terms of confession, not in terms of proof, but in terms of understanding, in identifying the mechanism and confirming that it had functioned exactly as designed. 5 cameras could miss a moment if they did not share time. 10 perspectives could fail to produce truth if they did not align. A system built to capture everything could still fail to register the only thing that mattered if attention was fragmented just enough to fall below recognition. Hale adjusted his coat as he walked, the motion automatic, unremarkable, and for a brief moment he considered the simplicity of it, not the act itself, but the principle behind it. The most effective way to hide an action was not to remove it from view. It was to ensure that it never existed in one place long enough to be seen. He didn't look back. Everyone was recording. Every angle was captured, and still no one saw the crime. Because the truth wasn't hidden, it was divided. If you enjoy modern detective stories in the spirit of Sherlock Holmes, subscribe to the channel. The next case is already waiting.